This is the resolution that this argument needed. This was not only the perfect way to bring these characters together again, but to have them finally acknowledge their own flaws and see each other for what they've really gone through. This episode, man, it hit hard. Hello everybody, I am Phenom Sage, and welcome back to another Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation review. Today we will be talking about episode 17, Reunion, and reunion indeed, because this episode finally gives us that emotional payoff to the meeting between Rudius and Paul from last week. I saw some people saying that this would and probably should have been a double-length episode to fit this entire arc in one sitting, and I completely agree. I think these past two episodes belong together in a way that is a shame that they couldn't pull off, but hey, on the binge you know that's going to hit even harder. Speaking of last week, I know I had my complaints, I had my criticisms about how they paced out that introduction to this conflict. I read a bunch of good replies, both agreeing and disagreeing with me. Thank you guys for being so chill about it. I honestly expected to get way more shit for the stuff that I said, and I just want to make it overly clear. My issue wasn't that we didn't get the resolution last week. It's not that I was just so grief-stricken that they ended their argument on an open, unconcluded note. That was the entire point of that episode. I'm completely fine with that. All I was saying is that I think that argument could have breathed a bit more. I think it could have been longer. I think there could have been more downtime. I think for what they were going for, it should have lasted a bit longer. That being said, I have very little complaints about how they executed the resolution in this week's episode. Paul very well may be my favorite character in the series so far. He's at least top 3, and one of the biggest reasons why is that it's nice to have a character who can admit that they're wrong. And this goes all the way back to episode 4, that whole fiasco with Paul and Lilia. It's nice to know people who can look at themselves in retrospect and realize that they were out of line or that they screwed up and they do what they can to make things right. In the real world, that is remarkably rare. In the real world, you have people like Rudius, people that get angry, get upset, lash out, and maybe realize they were in the wrong later on, but never actually act on it. They keep that pride to the end in a way that prevents them from owning up to their mistakes. For Paul, he's in a position where he's lost almost everything, and because of that, he can look at himself and realize that his pride isn't worth losing his son over. Pretty much the entire second half of this episode is just character writing excellence. The progression of the conversation, the long stretches of silence, the direction and shot composition, the final hug and resolution. It's so cathartic seeing them make up, and it's cathartic just seeing characters who feel so human interacting with each other in this way. The way that Paul finally tries to understand what Rudius has been through this entire time, the way that Rudius relates Paul's struggles to his own in the real world, this is a little something we like to call empathy, and it is the core of human relationships. Apologizing, reconnecting, loving, it all comes back to being able to empathize with each other. And maybe this is getting a little deep, maybe it's getting a little bit too real, but this relationship is clearly written by someone who understands human nature. I loved seeing Rudius connect to his real-world struggles, the fact that he was in a similar position but never gave up his pride, and in the end, that's what left him all alone. He's matured now. Paul is mature. They know that their relationship, the connections they have, are so much more important than whatever pride or conflict they may have. And unironically, I think a lot of people in real life could learn from this. It's not worth it holding on to all of those bitter feelings when a simple apology and empathizing with each other could fix so many problems. I loved Ruijerd in this episode too, by the way. He hasn't gotten a lot of screen time in a while, and it's not like he got a lot in this episode either, but I loved his words to Paul and Norn, how what really matters is that Rudius is alive, or how Norn should cherish her siblings. Those words have even more impact when you realize his perspective, how he's practically lost everything himself. He's speaking from the experience of someone who's lost his own son. It's just added context that makes those words even stronger, and I love how almost everyone this episode was rooting for and supporting Paul and Rudius's reconciliation in their own way. Shout out to that bartender, man. He's the real MVP of this episode. But even someone like Geese got a lot of strong dialogue and interactions with Paul, as he basically acted as an audience surrogate to tell Paul, hey, try looking at it from this perspective instead. That scene was so nice, and it was nice because it confirmed a lot of implications that we had about Paul's character and how he sees Rudius. The fact that he does see him as much more than just a simple child. He's seen from the beginning how incredible Rudius is, and that's why he had such high expectations of him. And it's also nice to see that Paul, in spite of that, by the end of this episode, just realize how thankful he is to have Rudius back in his arms, regardless of his expectations or how talented he may be. I love that line from Geese, who basically says, would you have rathered him return broken, missing parts of himself? Would that make you feel more open to reuniting with him? And this all ties back to what I mentioned before about how Paul and Zenith haven't had many opportunities to be actual parents to Rudius. He's always been so mentally distant from parenting because obviously he doesn't need to be parented at this point at all. And it's caused this rift where Paul sees an 11-year-old child as someone who's basically ready to be sent out into the world on his own. By the end, things are looking up, but I like that not everything is 100% happy and wrapped in a bow. Paul and Rudius may have made up, but even by the end of the episode, you can see that Norn still looks at Rudius harshly, and that's the kind of young trauma and animosity that will take a bit more than a simple conversation and apology to repair. I have no idea when Rudius will see either of them again. I have to imagine it's going to at least be a few years based on how time moves in this series and the scale of the journey that Rudius is on. But I am looking forward to seeing that reunion again, and I really love, by the way, how the way Norn held on to those bitter feelings is equally reflected by Eris in this episode as well. She's basically the Norn on Rudius' side. She saw how hurt and depressed Rudius became after their argument, and even by the end of the episode, you can tell that she hasn't forgiven Paul for what he did either. Overall, we didn't spend too much time in this city or on the Mills continent, but it makes sense because right now, Rudius' priority is seeing what's become of Eris's home and then searching the central continent for Zenith, Lilia, and Sylphie. My question at this point is, once we get there and see that it's just a void of nothingness, Saros is dead, Philip is who knows where, what will become of the team? Are we all just going to search for the missing people together? Or is Rudius going to find some place for Eris to stay permanently? I don't know. That seems a little harsh, but we also know that Rudius is someone who considers Eris's safety the top priority, so obviously he's not going to want to do anything that puts her in danger. There were also lots of little things that I really enjoyed in the episode. I absolutely loved the way that they handled the opening montage of Paul being transported. I didn't mention the new OP last episode, but the way it's used here is so damn good, and I wonder if the trend of openings changing per location stays the same, if we'll get a new OP by the next episode if we reach the central continent by then. Or maybe even the opening will go back to opening 1 and it'll be a designated opening per location. I don't know. Either way is cool with me. I'm just looking forward to next episode and seeing where the story goes. However, I do have to mention my one criticism of the episode. It's not that big of a deal. It's not as big of a deal as I thought it would be. I'm too satisfied with the rest of the episode to really let it bother me, but a couple weeks ago I did mention the trend of conveniences that happen in this series. The fact that the world starts feeling smaller and we coincidentally bump into important things. And I also mentioned how there was a theory about geese that I saw on Discord that I would consider pretty ridiculous if it were the case. And well, it does happen to be the case that Geese does know Paul, and assumedly is the last mystery person of Paul's old party that Ghislaine mentioned in part 1. Is this a big issue? At this point, not especially. I'm cool with them running into each other, and obviously it led to some great moments and dialogue this episode, but at the same time, I really hope the story chills out a bit on Rudeus just happening to bump into extremely relevant and important people by complete coincidence, because it does end up making the world feel smaller as a result. But I also think that I need to get into the mindset that this is kind of written in a way that embraces those coincidences, and it makes every chance encounter actually contribute to the overall story. That's not usually what I prefer in fantasy world building. I'm someone who loves these meandering, pointless diversions that are just meant for character building and world building, but I also know that making everything matter and making everything important is also a valid way to write these fantasy stories. Great episode overall though, one of the best in the series for sure, and I have to imagine that most of you loved it as well, so let me know in the comments what you loved about it the most, and join the Discord server linked in the description below if you want to talk to me or other people about it. That's been all from me. I hope you are having a wonderful day. I love you all, and I will see you in the next video.